Hi, this is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of January 20th, 2025. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the projects page on national blog site medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we discuss what Legislative Finance's overview of the governor's budget says about the fiscal situation the legislature is facing this coming year. Second, we ask what the heck Enstar is doing now in its ongoing efforts around Southcentral gas supplies. And third, we discuss the selective political mutism of some when it comes time to address the adverse impact of PFD cuts on the economics of working class Alaska families, and even on Alaska entrepreneurship. And now, let's join Michael.
I guess we'll just go ahead and get cracking, get started on it. There's a new review out from Leg Finance, which gives us a little bit of a taste, a precursor of what this session is probably going to look like from a monetary standpoint. Let's get to it.
Well, there's 3 documents really that those who follow fiscal matters sort of look forward to. Maybe is a wrong word, but take into account as you approach the session. One is the governor's budget, certainly, to see what the governor is proposing to the legislature, as unrealistic as it may be, or as empty as this last proposal from the governor. But that's one, the governor's budget. The second is the fall revenue forecast, which is the Department of Revenue's honest and I think for the most part is honest, an honest, straightforward look at the sources of revenue the state has and where they're headed. And what's going on with them. And the notable one from this fall revenue forecast, as we've seen from a couple of the last forecasts, is that even though oil production is going up by orders of magnitude, revenue from oil is staying flat. And that's the big take away from the fall revenue forecast. The third one that's not as widely known as the first 2, but the third one that is equally as important, I've come to realize in my view is equally as important, is Leg Finance's analysis of the governor's budget. Overview, they call it the overview of the governor's proposed budget. And it's published in advance of the start of the legislative session. And the reason that is important is it's another non-aligned, or it's another independent view of what the governor at the time, whatever governor it is, what the governor has proposed in terms of the realism of the governor's proposal. But it's also sort of an insight into at least what some parts of legislative leadership are thinking about, are looking at in terms of numbers and in terms of constraints on what their flexibility is. Leg Finance essentially works for the chairs of Senate Finance and House Finance, and certainly the head of Leg Finance is close to both of those. And I think as a result, this overview is really written for those clients to tell them what the important parts are of the governor's proposed budget and the state's outlook, fiscal outlook.
Right.
This one is the one. This one got published. This year's Ledge Finance overview got published late last week, Thursday or Friday. And the executive summary of it, if those listening or those watching haven't read it, is worth the time to read. I want to highlight one thing in particular that the overview says. It's on page 8 of the executive summary, or page 8 of the introduction. There's two parts to it. One is a table that sort of totals up spending, the governor's proposed spending, plus realistically what needs to be added to that spending to fill it out. And at least from the legislature's standpoint, what the legislature is going to be looking at, that realistically needs to be added to it to fill it out, to make it a valid budget, and then compares that to revenue. And here's the bottom line. Adding those items, which are not many, but sort of the items necessary to make the budget a complete budget. Adding those items, which represent costs necessary to maintain state services at the same level as FY25, the year we're in now, and we're talking about the FY26 budget, so which represent costs necessary to maintain state services at the same level as FY25, would result in a substantial deficit in FY26, even with a 75-25 PFD appropriation. To balance that budget, the legislature would need to reduce spending, will need to reduce spending, pass legislation, increase revenue, further reduce the PFD, or draw from savings. So, we've been told all along by Burt and by Lyman and by others that 75-25 is the line. That's where we're going to draw the line. That's where the PFD, that's where we're going to stop taking from the PFD. And we're finally going to get to 75. We're going to get to 75-25. We're not going to take from the PFD anymore. Well, we've hit 75-25. We hit 75-25 this year. Actually, we're a little bit over, given where oil prices have gone. We're a little bit over 75-25. We're going to be about 76-24 this year. But when you look at FY26, it's clear that we're going over the edge. The graph, the chart that is with that language is headed at 75-25 PFD alone won't balance the budget. And it shows the projected FY26 revenue that's in the fall revenue forecast. The dollars from the governor's proposed budget shows the surplus deficit from that, shows the effect of reducing the PFD to 75-25, the additional revenue that comes from reducing the PFD to 75-25 compared to the governor's statutory PFD, shows a slight surplus from that if you reduce to 75-25 and use the governor's budget, you would have a slight surplus, 30 some odd $30 million. But then adds the additional K through 12 funding to match FY25. Remember what Ledge Finance is doing here is trying to get back to FY25 service levels. You add the K through 12 funding necessary to match FY25. The projected Medicaid additions in Medicaid that the administration itself has said additional Medicaid funding is needed in order to maintain FY25 standards, and the added placeholder for contractual increases. The state is in negotiation with various employee unions right now, and this is the anticipated result of those contractual increases. And you get a deficit. You end up with a deficit of about $200 million, and that's assuming the oil prices projected in the FY26 revenue forecast hold.
Right.
It's not clear they're going to hold.
Right. And just to clarify, that's just the K-12 funding number that matches last year. That's not the $1,900 that we've seen, the $1,000. It's not the new stuff that we're seeing thrown around. This would just match what they spent last year, and it doesn't include defined benefits. It doesn't include royalty relief for the cook inlet or any other kind of subsidy for the cook. This is just matching.
It doesn't include the $50 million that Ada has promised, or Ada's said they would fund to underwrite the study that Glenfarne is going to do in the big line. I mean, it doesn't include anything other than those items. So it's showing that we've hit the wall. We've hit the wall that Burt, Lyman, and others have said is the new standard. It's the wall they're not going to. It's the line in the sand that they're not going to cross. We've now hit the FY26 is hitting the wall and going through the wall. And the question now is what the legislature is going to do about it. We've talked on the show for a while that we're going to get there. And if you look at these numbers, if you apply the same standards that Ledge Finance uses, and I've redone my projection numbers to reflect Ledge Finance's projected spending levels off of this baseline. We're at 81% of the POMV draw for state government to balance state government. If that's all you use to balance state government, 81% in FY26, 83% in FY27, 86% in FY28, 89% in FY29, 90% in FY30, and it just goes on. It goes on.
And again, that's assuming pretty flat. That's assuming pretty flat spending, right? I mean, on the numbers that you're talking about, with 89% of the PFD being, 89% going to government, that's with flat spending. That's no increases. That's just kind of accounting for what we got and keeping up with the Joneses. That has nothing to do with new spending, right?
Yep, exactly right, Michael. So all these people are going down to Juneau and saying, oh, we need more funding for this. We need more funding for that. There was an editorial in the Fairbanks News-Miner over the weekend. We need more funding for things that are important to the interior. And I'm sure they are important to the interior. But all of these people who are going down to Juneau and say we need additional funding. This is the wall. This is the wall that Lyman and Burt said was the wall. This is the line in the sand that Lyman and Burt said over the years was the line in the sand. And so we're going to find out, what reality is. We're going to find out if they're going to support that wall or allow a breach, and then where do we go from there?
Right.
Or B, whether we're going to talk about new revenues, or C, whether we're going to talk about decreased spending in other areas to make room for even holding level at FY25 service levels.
Right.
We're going to find out. It's a big issue. You're right. The media is not talking about it yet, but it's a big issue, and the Ledge Finance overview tells us that it's here.
And if we get the spending that everybody's promising, it won't be 75-25. We'll be lucky to get 95-5, maybe. Just the verbiage in this P, and I'm going to throw it back up there again because it's so again, that just right there, 75-25 alone won't balance the budget. And if we just held steady, I mean, and that is so pie in the sky, the idea that somehow we're only going to hold steady because everybody's promising everybody everything. New retirement program, new this, new schools funding, new that, all that. We will still be $200 million in the hole, at least, with just the flat spending. I mean, it's. But my prognostication again has come true. The PFD, we're watching the death of the PFD, Brad, right now. As we speak, we are watching the slow and steady death of the PFD right now.
Yeah. I mean, we drew a line in the sand at the statutory level, blew through that like there was nothing to it. Drew a line in the sand at 50-50, blew through that like there was nothing to it. And then Burt and Lyman. And I want to emphasize this over and over and over and over again. These guys said 75-25. That's what we need. We'll be able to survive at 75-25. We'll hold the line at 75-25. I'm sure there's places where Bryce is on the line. Neil Foster is on the line. I'm sure you can find everybody saying 75-25 is what we need. We'll hold the line there. That's what they said. We're at that point. What are they going to do? And yes, if they breach that line, Chuck Kopp said we're going to balance the budget without overdrawing from the ERA. And I and others have taken that to mean we're going to balance it through PFD cuts, because he certainly didn't talk about new revenue. And he said, in fact, there would not be new oil revenue, that we would not go back in and address oil taxes. So, I mean, they're setting up the rate on the PFD. And once you breach the 75-25 line that everybody has said is their line in the sand, once you breach that, I don't know where you stop.
Well, I mean, I don't think you do. I don't think you do. I think a lot of this is just platitudes that people have said over the years. And I think in their heart of hearts, they realize that it was just a platitude to keep you satiated in the short term. They realize, I mean, again, to me, Brad, my main thrust has always been, since 1999, I've been saying this, when they made that first run at the PFD, I said the main goal is to get access to the corpus. That's the whole point. They eventually want to get access to the corpus. And we saw that end run. We saw that play last year, which is still not dead, but where they were talking about combining the ERA into the corpus, about creating one solid fund and then just drawing out. That's what it is. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's just platitudes to keep us satiated and satisfied and quiet and quiescent until they can get that get a shot at that big pot of money.
I think part of it, Michael, too, was they thought there was such room. I mean, we tried to draw the line in the sand at POMV 50-50, right?
Right.
And they breached that. I think part of it was they thought there was so much fiscal room between POMV 75-25 or between POMV 50-50 and 25-75 that they wouldn't use it up, at least for a long period of time. They'd be safe in making the statement. Well,
right.
It's like 3 years later. And we're there. And what you don't anticipate, the way we have set this state up, what you don't anticipate is oil revenues. And if oil revenues go down on you, the oil revenues don't stick to the schedule that you think they're on, and they go down on you, then all of a sudden, the fiscal space you thought you had goes away. Because a large part of that fiscal space was based on the oil revenue level.
Yeah, I mean, no. Chris over on YouTube says not platitudes, lies. They just don't want access to the corpus. The real target is the future of all Alaska natural resources. I don't think you're wrong. I think that's kind of where we're at. But access to the corpus makes all their dreams come true as big status. That's what they really want. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top three continues as we mourn the death of the PFD. I mean, I think this might be the first year that somebody actually says something about it, because they're going to have to. They can't just keep saying, 75-25 will be great. Oh, no, 80-20. Oh, no, 85-15. Oh, 90-10. I mean, they're going to have to actually say, and like Brad said, and even the Ledge Finance document said, they're going to have to talk about new revenues. Everybody was so down on Ben Carpenter for even suggesting that part of the solution might be some form of taxation or something else. It's inevitable. I've been saying this for 5 years. It's inevitable that we will reach that point because this legislature cannot control itself. Anyway, one of the big things that I'm sure is going to be one of the big elephants in the room, of course, is the Cook Inlet gas shortage issue. And Brad's got a question. What the heck is Enstar doing now? Brad, what's going on now?
It's hard to follow the bouncing ball that's going on with Enstar in the Cook Inlet. Just for reference, I pulled up a couple of older news articles that sort of defined where this ball has gone so far. There's the news article from the middle of 2023 that reports on the presentation by Enstar and BRG consultant, the consultant that the Cook Inlet utilities, the Southcentral utilities, hired to look at the gas situation. The presentation that BRG and Enstar made to the Public Utilities Commission, or the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, as we call it now, talking about the Cook Inlet shortage and the options that the state was facing, and all the alternatives that the state was facing. The most cost-effective of which the lowest cost of which was imported LNG. That was the middle of 2023. And that, in that comment, or in that report, they said we were going to finish sort of the next phase of this report by the end of 2023, and we would be back and report at the beginning of 2024 about what direction we were going. We would have an aligned direction. We would have completed the consultant's report. We would have an aligned direction on what direction we were going, and we would be back to report to the commission. Well, we've never seen the second phase of that report. It's never, ever, ever been released. The utilities didn't come back to the commission, publicly at least, at the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024 to explain what direction they were going. The next set of headlines is from, I pulled up the Frontiersman, the article by Tim Bradner in the middle of 24, July 22nd, 2024. And the headline is, Enstar tells regulators it will have a plan to import LNG by year end. And it reports on a filing that Enstar had made, an application that Enstar had made with the Public Utilities Commission, with the RCA, Regulatory Commission of Alaska, for $50 some odd million in pipelines to be built over near Port McKenzie in anticipation of using Port McKenzie, building facilities at Port McKenzie for gas offtake off of a floating LNG facility. The pipes necessary to bring that gas that would come off the barge, come off the ships at Port McKenzie, and connect into the Enstar system, and through the Enstar system into the rest of the utility grid, into the gas-fired generation plants that the electric utilities use. And that was the plan in the middle of July 22nd, 2024. Enstar got approval for the new pipelines that they were going to build over near Port McKenzie, and they told the commission at that time that they would have contracts, they would have a plan in place by the end of 2024 around this proposal that they had made at Port McKenzie. Well, the next thing we have is August of 2024. We have a press release or a statement during their earnings call by a company called Accelerate Energy, which is a floating LNG company, that they were in negotiations with Cook Inlet Utilities, and that they were deep in negotiations and anticipated having a plan in place by the end of the year. And that would line up with what Enstar told the RCA in the middle of 2024 about what it was doing over at Port McKenzie. So we get to the end of 2024, and the really interesting thing is the way this leaked out. In the middle of so Dunleavy has the conference where he talks about the big LNG line and talks about they've entered into this contract with a major player, quote, major player,
right? His foxhole conversion too, because he was against it the whole time, and all of a sudden,
well, yeah, this is the export line that we've entered into a contract with a major player. Then Landfield, the Alaska landmine, gets wind that it's Glenfarne, posts, says that they understand this unnamed player that the governor's talked about is Glenfarne, and Glenfarne issues a release. And in the middle of the release, it says it's been talking to Enstar and has an exclusive agreement with Enstar. I don't think Enstar was ready for this, but has an exclusive agreement with Enstar around a project not at Port McKenzie, not at the existing LNG facility that we have down on the Kenai, but a grassroots new LNG import facility at the location where the export facility, the LNG export facility, is supposedly going to be built, adjacent to the old LNG, the existing LNG plant down in Kenai, the one that's now owned by Marathon, adjacent physically in land, but a brand new facility that would be built at that point. And so all of a sudden Glenfarne, and I don't think Enstar was ready for this. Glenfarne announces that they've got a deal with Enstar on how, as part of this overall deal, that they've got a deal with Enstar for importing LNG. So last week, Enstar, John Sims, goes into the RCA and lays out what its plan is. Now, it's just Enstar. They're not talking on behalf of the other utilities. So we don't know if this is a joint plan It all started out as a joint plan, a joint study. We were all going to be cost effective and come to this conclusion together. Now Enstar is off on its own, talking about its own plan for an import facility at the site in Nikiski, the new site in Nikiski. So they're talking about a deal. This is not a done deal. So they're talking about the potential of striking a deal with a thinly capitalized, a small cap company, Glenfarne, which frankly is not a big company at all by any stretch of the imagination. A small cap company that doesn't own the land at Nikiski. It would get that land, the rights of that land, maybe as part of the bigger deal on the big LNG project, but doesn't own the land. Neither does Enstar. So they're talking about a project on land neither one of them owns. And they're talking about it. Sims says during his discussion with the RCA that, I'm comfortable. We're going to get to this in 2030, 2031. And I think we have enough supply. Enstar has enough supply to get there. Well, not the other utilities may not. But Enstar thinks it has enough supply to get there when this deal finally hits home. Bob Pickett, who I respect greatly as an RCA commissioner. He's been around since Sarah Palin. He's been on the RCA commission. He's seen, dumb ideas come and go. He's seen smart ideas come and go, but he's seen a lot of ideas out there. Bob Pickett, during this RCA hearing, tells Sims that he doesn't think he's concerned that he doesn't think this deal is going to land in time, if it lands at all. And really basically says, what the hell are you doing now? Sims is very calm, as Sims is about most things. Sims is very calm, says, well, we're going to get this deal home. But we don't know what the deal is. I mean, Enstar hasn't filed anything to outline what the deal is. Enstar says it has this exclusive agreement with Glenfarne to do the deal, but it hasn't released what the exclusive agreement is, what the terms of the exclusive agreement are. If Enstar has tied its hands in an exclusive deal with this one company that has never built an LNG import facility, is trying to build 2 LNG export facilities, but hasn't gotten those done yet, hasn't gotten those to FID, is a small cap company. If Enstar's tied its hands to this project on land that neither of them own, if Enstar's tied its hands to this project, we may be in for a heck of a mess. So the question is, what the heck is Enstar doing? I mean, and that was basically Bob Pickett's question. What the heck are you doing, Enstar? Because there's no consistency through all these themes. There's no next step. We're following one step with the next step. The next step always seems to be on, some other playing field, as opposed to the playing field that they said they were on up to a given point in time. It is time to have concerns about what Enstar's doing. It's past time, really, but it's certainly time now to have concerns about what Enstar's up to and what the terms of this deal with Glenfarne is, and if Enstar has tied his hands into a deal that's somehow dependent on the bigger pipeline deal working, because the bigger pipeline deal isn't going to go.
So you were saying that they were surprised by the Glenfarne deal. That this kind of caught them by surprise is what your takeaway is from this, and it kind of
the public
their plans, or what?
The public announcement of it was, I mean, at the Dunleavy press conference, remember there was all this reference to this unnamed company that AGDC was working with for the big pipeline, for the big export pipeline, this unnamed company they were working with. Well, about 5 days later, it leaks that it's Glenfarne. And then Glenfarne, in its press release, Enstar hadn't said anything about working with the same company that AGDC was working with. And then about 5 days later, it leaks that it's Glenfarne. And Glenfarne then, in response, issues a press release saying, yes, it's us. We're doing this deal with AGDC. We're going down the road with AGDC. And then in the next paragraph says, oh, and by the way, we're doing one with Enstar too, about an import facility. Enstar hadn't hinted at any of that. And all of a sudden, here's Glenfarne deciding to come clean with what it's doing up in Alaska. And all of a sudden, it drops this paragraph in that mentions Enstar. And I suspect that Enstar was surprised to see Glenfarne release its name in the middle of all that.
Well, we've talked about why we think Enstar's been dragging its feet. You and I have speculated as to why, and the bottom line is that they're looking for somebody else to carry the water and foot the bill on this instead of passing it over. And I think John Sims also probably looking for a big win because there's speculation that he may want to run for governor in the next cycle, and so he's looking for some kind of big W to put in his column. And so between those two things, that could be the main reason why they've been, because I mean, MEA and Chugach have both been like, well, we're moving ahead. We're moving ahead to the import thing. They've been talking a lot more positively about that and taking some steps, but Enstar has just been kind of spinning its wheels and being quiet until they couldn't be quiet anymore.
Yeah, until somebody released out from underneath, released the information out from underneath them. And here's I went back. There was an editorial by the Chugach chairman and the Chugach president a few weeks back that talked about where they were going in the cookulent, and they said they were going forward with LNG, imported LNG.
Right.
And I thought, okay, they and Enstar are probably working on this deal that an Enstar announced in the middle of last year up at Fort McKenzie, and we're proceeding forward. Now, you've really got to wonder, because Sims's presentation to the RCA doesn't mention Chugach or MEA or many of the other utilities with respect to what it's doing, and in fact implies that they're now on a different time schedule. When Sim says Enstar can hold out longer than the others, implies that they're on a longer time schedule than the others. So now you got to wonder what the hell Chugach and MEA are doing.
Right. Well, is Enstar going it alone? Right? Are they doing their own, playing by their own thing and playing the long game, or what?
And here's the deal, Michael. These aren't cheap things to build.
Right.
So one of the advantages of having the utilities work together was economies of scale. Right. We're going to build one facility
and
that's
share
going to handle that shares the demand of all the players. Now you have the impression that maybe we have two facilities coming. Enstar has one on land it doesn't own, and the person it's entered into the contract with doesn't own. Enstar's on going one way, and Chugach and MEA are going another way, and we may end up with two facilities with the costs layered on of two facilities. It's a mess.
Yeah. Well,
and there's two ways to get this cleaned up. One is the RCA steps up and says, look, you may have the obligation to propose this stuff. You may have the obligation to build this stuff, but we have the obligation to have oversight over you on this stuff. Tell us what the hell's going on. Or the legislature does that.
One thing for sure, we know who's going to pay for it one way or the other. That would be us. Just wanted to point that out. I mean, at some point, somebody's got to call. I mean, at some point, somebody's got to call the ball and say, hey, whoa, wait a second. Do we need duplication of effort? Do we need two different facilities at, $50 million at whatever the cost? I mean, it's huge money.
Well, it's more than that.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge money, right? 50, 100, 200 million, however much it is. Do we need two facilities? And why are we working at cross purposes? And why is Enstar continuing to drag its feet, only getting dragged out into the light when somebody slips up and mentions something about what's going on? I mean, again, betting on the if come is never going to work out for you. Right? Never going to work out. You can't be like, oh, yes, we're going to build this. Now that we have this, we know we're going to have pipe by 2035. By the way, you're going to run out of gas in 2027. So, I mean, no big deal. But, 2035, it's insane. And it's like everybody's waiting around for the legislature to do something like they are decisive and have got an idea of what's going on.
Well, and the legislature has no business in this, right? The utilities have an obligation in exchange for their monopolies. The utilities have an obligation to provide adequate service at reasonable cost. It's the utilities' obligation to do this. It's the Regulatory Commission of Alaska's obligation to oversee that the utilities, because they're monopolies, because there's no alternative for ratepayers to go to, for consumers to go to, if the utilities blow this, is the RCA is set up to oversee it. That we've got a system in place to handle this. The legislature has no business getting involved in this. The only time the legislature needs to get involved in this is if the RCA doesn't do its job in oversight of this. And the RCA is right at the cutting edge of not doing it, right at the bleeding edge of not doing its job in terms of oversight of this. But we don't need. I mean, what we don't need is the legislature saying, oh well, we need to give more royalty relief. We need to give out more dollars to producers. We need to, bear some of the costs of these import facilities ourselves. It's a mess, Michael. And I don't think I emphasized enough the concern I have about Enstar being tied to Glenfarne. Glenfarne's big objective here is to do the big line, the AKLNG line, and to take over the AKLNG line. That's where their money's going to be made. I don't know how the heck Enstar got tossed into this, but they did somehow. But the Glenfarne deal is the Glenfarne deal with AKLNG is far from done. Far from done. I mean, even Frank Richards said the contracts are months away, far from done. And actually doing something depends on financing, and they haven't even remotely got the financing put together yet. So is Enstar the tail on the dog? Is the Enstar deal with Glenfarne the tail on the dog while Glenfarne works on the big deal? Cook Inlet can't stand that sort of, Cook Inlet's not on the same time frame that the big line's on. And so if Enstar is waiting around on Glenfarne to sort of look back and concentrate on its deal with Enstar once it has its deal with the big line in place, because that's the only time Glenfarne will get rights to the land that this proposed facility goes on, then we're just sitting around twiddling our thumbs, waiting on something that likely will never happen. But if it's going to happen, it's going to be months down the road. Enstar needs to be on the job now, needs to be filing applications, need to be filing for permits, needs to be putting together the deal to have the gas together. The utilities, Cook Inlet utilities, need to be doing that now, and they're not.
Everybody's waiting for Uncle Sugar to open up his pocketbook and give them some money. That's and of course they will, because they have to do something, right?
But Uncle Sugar, go back to the first segment. Uncle Sugar has no money.
Yeah, he opens it up and the little moths come out of the wallet. That's what's there. There's IOUs in the wallet. I mean, that's the problem. But we've gotten so used to that in this state. That's what everybody's doing. Everybody's waiting for the state to come up, to belly up to the bar and buy drinks for the house. That's what they're waiting for right now.
Well, hopefully they'll be waiting a long time for that, because Uncle Sugar has no money. Let's go back to segment one. Let's go back to what Ledge Finance told us.
But I know that, Brad. You and I both know that. But do you think that the legislature is going to have that aha come to Jesus moment where they realize, ooh, we can't do that? Do you really think that they're going to be like, we've got to cut some stuff? We can't give all this stuff. We've been talking about it for a year. We're going to give you all this new funding. We're going to do all this new school stuff. We're going to do defined. Do you really think that they're going to, come to that, look at it and go, oh, I guess we can't? What? PFD draw? CBR draw?
Burt and Lyman turned out to be liars. Burt and Lyman turned out when they said that they were going to draw the line in the sand at 75-25, they were liars.
Yeah. Well, won't be the first time that politicians turned out to be liars. All right. Won't be the first time that politicians turned out to be mistaken, to be more polite. But this is this whole thing is just so astonishing to watch. Okay, Brad Keithley, Weekly Top 3 continues down to the last segment here for today. And today, the final one, we're going to talk about political mutism, the ability to mutate and morphism, camouflage, the chameleon effect. What are we talking about here, Brad?
No. Selective mutism is something different.
Okay.
So selective mutism is defined by the health service as an anxiety disorder where a person is unable to speak in certain social situations, such as with classmates at school or relatives.
Okay.
They do not see very often. It's muted. They go mute.
Being mute, right? Being mute, not being mutable, but being mute. Okay, got it.
They can't talk in certain situations, and evidently not for you, but for those people who watch The Big Bang Theory over the years, it's the anxiety disorder that Raj, the character that played Raj, suffered from. He couldn't talk in the presence of women. Raj couldn't talk in the presence. He could talk when he was with his friends, his bros. He could talk when he was, dealing with scientific matters with other males, but he couldn't talk in social situations in the presence of women. He had selective mutism in those situations. And I'm using that term to describe what I'm seeing from certain legislators, maybe all legislators, if I looked at it hard enough, but certainly certain legislators and certain commentators with respect to the issues that the legislature is going to be dealing with this year, the issues that the legislature should be dealing with this year. It really came to mind hardest when I was reading a blog by Matt Buxton. Matt Buxton, for years, was a respected reporter up at the Fairbanks News Miner. I read Matt's work as often as he wrote it, as quickly as I could after he wrote it, because I really respected his insights into the political process in Alaska. A few years ago, Matt went over and became a blogger, left the News Miner and became a blogger, and increasingly has identified himself as a progressive blogger, taking the progressive side of things. And in his most recent Friday memo, Alaska memo, which he writes in advance of the coming legislative session, he talks about the focus on working class issues. While there are many unknowns about the years ahead, there are many reasons to be optimistic about the incoming bipartisan coalitions in the Alaska House and Senate, which have made addressing working class issues like education and retirements a key part of their platforms. Well, there is no more, in my opinion, there's no more a working class issue, no greater working class issue than the PFD. No greater working class issue than the discriminatory, regressive, hugely disproportionate take of income from middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts, a targeted tax on middle and lower income, which are classified as working class families. No greater issue than that on the revenue side. And yet, Matt writes this entire column focused on talking about how the House and Senate are going to focus on working class issues without mentioning the PFD once. It's mutism. I mean, the progressives, the moderates, just don't want to talk about the PFD because that's how they're financing all of their special projects, all of their special spending that they want to accomplish. And they just don't talk about the elephant in the room. They just don't talk about the impact of PFD cuts on working class Alaska families. Another example of it, I was reading the Alaska Current, which is sort of the left's version or the moderates version of Must Read Alaska. And in another article written by Matt Buxton, this on incoming Representative Kai Holland from South Anchorage, the title of it is Independent Kai Holland Brings Entrepreneurial Spirit to Juneau. And the entire column is focused on Kai's background as an entrepreneur, proposals Kai is going to have in terms of legislation for, identifying entrepreneurial policies that the state ought to adopt, pursuing entrepreneurial policies that support entrepreneurs that the state ought to adopt. Well, there's no greater issue to entrepreneurs than access to capital. And in terms of small businesses, small startups, there's no better capital. We've seen economic analyses of this. There's no better capital available to small entrepreneurs, to startups than PFDs. They come in a chunk. They come at one time. Are an available source of capital to small businesses and entrepreneurs to help get them started. We've seen testimony to that effect that's what PFDs are used for. And so we go through this entire article. Matt goes through this entire article, including an interview with Kai at various places, or quotes from Kai at various places about what's needed to create entrepreneurial spirit in Alaska, to create entrepreneurial opportunity in Alaska. No mention of the PFD. In fact, no mention of capital formation in the entire article. It's just mutism. It's just, we're not going to talk about we're not going to talk about that thing because we don't want to talk about that thing, because
Right.
that thing's, while it's important to us, while it's important to working class Alaska families, while it's important to entrepreneurs, we just don't want to talk about it. We're going to go mute about approach.
Right.
Mute about that approach.
We're not going to say the quiet part out loud because we know that it will offend. We know that we don't want to say it out there just because we know people will be upset about it, and we want to kind of slide it in.
Well, we want access to the money. I mean, basically is what it is. Those who claim to be concerned about working class families, they want the money. Instead of giving the money to the working class families, they want the money to bring it through government, to direct it through government employees to specific segments of Alaska families, which aren't just limited to the working class Alaska families. They also include the top 20%. But we want to control that money. We don't want working class Alaska families to have that money themselves. That would make their lives better, would give them capital formation for entrepreneurial efforts. We don't want them to have that money. So we're not going to talk about it. Here's the thing that really stung me, or really got me going at the end of Matt's article about Kai. A top-down approach, this is quoting Kai, a top-down approach to economic growth where state officials and legislators pick and choose the winners, Holland said, doesn't work nearly as well as when innovation emanates from the ground up. It's an old school view to think that we can have this perfect knowledge to pick some bright, shiny direction and create a plan for the next big thing. What we've learned from economic development is you have to have this iterative process that sees the opportunities and takes the next step to move that direction. Well, the opportunities are created only if the entrepreneurs have access to capital.
Right. Exactly. You missed a whole point in there. 1 minute, Brad. 1 minute. Fine.
Well, you did miss the whole point. The whole point is it shouldn't be top down, yet the funding mechanism they're using and the funding mechanism that they're ignoring is top down. It's taking money into the state as opposed to leaving it in the hands of Alaska families, taking into the state so the state can decide who gets the money and who gets to be the winners and losers. It's this mutism is just undoing everything they claim that they're trying to support.
Yeah, well, but again, this is what they've been bum about this whole subject the whole time. They're never touching on it, and the news media is mostly complicit. Like you said, this current article doesn't mention it once. What's his face? Matt Buxton doesn't mention it once. It's like it's one of the biggest economic drivers in the state, and it's like as long as the state's taking care of the private economy, we really don't care. That's the message that continues to be sent here. I mean, and I know Kim just said we need a deep clean of legislators. We've tried. But there's that crew, there's that small cadre of business as usual people who've been there for, since Christ was a corporal, and here we are. They're still driving the bus. They're still doing it. And they've, in some terms, corrupted some of the newer people that have been brought in with the same kind of thinking. I mean, and now we've got a new slate of legislators, some of whom we're already on board the bandwagon of we've got to spend it all because you can't be trusted to spend your own money and the private economy doesn't matter. I have to laugh when he's like, oh, he's an entrepreneur and he's doing all this. Is really? Because that's how you'd run a business? You have to have an iterative process. You have to you can't do, I mean, it's, oh man.
Yeah, the paragraph that really sent me into the stratosphere was a top-down approach to economic growth where state officials and legislators pick and choose the winners, Holland said, doesn't work nearly as well when innovation emanates from the ground up. Yet, the PFD, sucking up the PFD, diverting the PFD to government so government can decide where to spend it instead of individuals, is the biggest top-down program you possibly can have.
Right.
That's the one that's sucking up, that's taking capital out of the hands of Alaska citizens that they need to start, that they would use to start new businesses, that they would use to be innovative, that they would use to have hobbies they could turn into businesses. It's capital that if you put it into the hands of people will do a number of things, including turnover more times in the Alaska economy, the local Alaska economy than being spent by the state. It will generate more economic growth. Cutting that off and diverting that money into the state is the biggest top-down program in this state's history. And yet it's one that Holland and Buxton and all of the other people who write about this stuff don't talk about at all. They just go mute. whenever that issue comes up, because they don't want to confront it.
Well, and in all fairness, even people like Suzanne Downing and others, if they touch on the PFD, it's just like a brief. They don't ever get down into the weeds on, fiscally, does this make sense or anything else? And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to watch for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, Republicans have their own programs, right? We want to, we want to help out Cook Inlet. We want to give revenue back to producers.
Yeah, absolutely.
In Cook Inlet. I mean, it's just, and Julie Colomb had the child care situation. It's just the child care program. It's just everybody's got a program they need revenue for, and they'll just grab the revenue that's going to middle and lower income Alaska families without even thinking about it.
Yeah, we want to cut, but not my program. That's and that's a problem nationwide. Oh, we want to cut, just not my program, because my program's important. The rest of them can be cut, but not realizing that austerity has got to be across the board. If you're going to make cuts, everybody's got to feel the pain. It can't be not in my backyard, because eventually arithmetic is going to win. I mean, there's just no, and we're seeing it this year in Alaska, like you were talking about earlier with that projection that said, 75-25, not going to fill the bucket this year. So it'll be 80, 84, 15. And then next year, as things continue to increase, it'll be even, right? I'm not wrong, right? Arithmetic is going to win in the end.
You're not wrong, Michael. I mean, we let legislators, all of whom are in the top 20% themselves by virtue of the pay increase that they got. We let legislators decide that they're going to exempt themselves from having to pay for these programs by using PFD cuts. They're going to exempt themselves and their donors, their friends, their donors who are also in the top 20%. We're going to exempt them from having to pay for these programs. But we're not going to stop the programs. We're just going to continue exempting our friends from the programs, even if we get to the line in the sand that Burton Lyman drew at 75-25. We're going to keep going,
right?
Because we're going to keep exempting our friends, and we're going to keep these programs going. It's a mess.
Yeah. Well, and here's where we live. And being able to tell all the folks later on that I told you so is not nearly as satisfying, I don't think, for me or Brad. But he and I have been talking about this for 10 years together, and another 10 years probably previously. I was talking about this 20 years ago, this same kind of thing, that this was the ploy. The ploy was to get access to the corpus to be able to grow the size and scope of government outside of the control of the public. That's what it's about.
Scott Goldsmith started telling us in 2008 this was coming. You in 1999, but Scott Goldsmith started writing papers in 2008 that this was coming.
Yeah,
and if you follow those papers, we've just gone down that track, the track that he outlined that the state was on. That everybody at the time said, "Oh no, we'll never do that."
Yeah. Maybe they used it as a roadmap. Oh, Scott's got a good plan here. Maybe we should use this. It's completely frustrating. All right, Brad. Well, thank you so much for coming on board. As always, it was painful and enlightening all at the same time. So thank you for being part of it today.
Well, maybe you're going to get ibuprofen as a gift here during the
I think I might need some ibuprofen, some ibuprofen in the one hand and Excedrin in the other, and, just kind of double fisted at this point. So, all right, Brad Keithley, thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate you coming on board.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the weekly top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week on the next edition of the Weekly Top 3.